There was a time when the mornings in Mary's small home began not with the sound of her alarm, but with the soft cry of her little boy, the sound that made her forget every ache, every hunger, every sleepless night. She would rise from her bed, her body tired, but her heart alive because she knew she was not living for herself, she was living for him. Her world began with his breath and ended with his smile. She carried him in her arms when she had nothing but faith, and she fed him with her dreams when her cupboard was bare. Each day she walked to work through the biting cold, her shoes worn thin, her coat patched by hand. She cleaned offices and washed dishes and stayed late when others went home. She never complained, because in her heart she kept a picture of her son's future, bright and full of hope. She told herself that every hour she worked was a brick in the foundation of his tomorrow. She skipped meals so he could have milk. She stayed home when she was sick because missing a day meant missing rent. But she never spoke of her pain. She only spoke of her pride. When the school sent notes for payments, she smiled and said she would take care of it, even when her wallet held only a few crumpled bills. She sold the little gold ring her husband once gave her, the only jewelry she ever owned, to pay for his textbooks, and she whispered to herself that love was not what you said, it was what you gave. She missed weddings and family gatherings. She wore the same dress for years. She cut her hair short so it would be easier to manage after long shifts. She did not care about her own reflection, because all her beauty was reflected in the boy who called her mom. When he brought home good grades, she danced in the kitchen with tears in her eyes. When he fell ill, she prayed through the night, whispering his name like a sacred word, asking God to take her strength and give it to him. People told her she was too soft, that she spoiled him, but she knew love was not weakness. It was the strongest force in the world. It was what made her rise when her body begged her to rest. It was what made her smile when the world told her she had nothing to smile about. She kept believing that one day her sacrifices would be seen not as struggle, but as love in its purest form. Years went by and her boy grew tall and strong. He no longer needed her to tie his shoes or pack his lunch, but still, every morning she found herself waiting by the door, hoping he would say goodbye before leaving. She watched him chase his dreams, and she told everyone who would listen that her son was her greatest achievement. She never told anyone about the nights she cried quietly in the kitchen when she thought about how quickly childhood slips away. She never told anyone how her hands ached from work, how her heart longed for a simple thank you. But that is the beauty and the tragedy of a mother's love. It gives and gives without asking anything in return. It bends without breaking, it sacrifices without seeking recognition. It is not written in headlines or carved in stone, but it is the reason men stand tall and women find courage to begin again. Mary never saw herself as brave. She thought she was just doing what mothers do. But her story was a testament to every woman who builds her child's dreams out of her own broken pieces. She was not just a mother, she was a quiet warrior whose battlefield was life itself, whose victory was seeing her son smile. And even though the world may forget her name, her love remains, written in the unseen spaces of his heart. Because love like hers never fades. It only hides behind the noise of time, waiting to be remembered when the world grows still again. The day Mary's son told her he was getting married, the air around her seemed to shimmer with light. It felt as if every prayer she had ever whispered, every sleepless night she had ever endured, had finally blossomed into something beautiful. She stood in her small kitchen, clutching the phone to her chest as tears welled in her eyes. Tears not of sadness, but of joy. She had always wanted this moment, to see her boy find someone who would love him as fiercely as she once did. She had dreamed of hearing the laughter of a daughter in her home, the echo of family continuing through generations. In the days that followed, she moved through the house with a purpose. She washed curtains, she polished old furniture, she pressed his childhood shirts and held them close for a moment before folding them away. She baked his favorite pie and cleaned the silver plates she rarely used. She even bought a new dress, simple but elegant, because she wanted to look her best, not for herself, but for him, for the day he would walk into her home with his bride. When the day finally came, she stood by the window, waiting, her heart pounding like it did when he was little and late coming home from school. She saw the car pull into the driveway, and for a second her breath caught. There he was, her little boy, now a man in love. He stepped out of the car with his wife, and Mary's heart filled with warmth. She hurried to the door, her smile trembling with emotion. Her son introduced his wife, a gentle woman with kind eyes and a soft voice. Mary reached out and held her hands, and in that moment she felt as if her family had grown, her heart expanding in quiet gratitude. She wanted to be the kind of mother-in-law who could love without boundaries. She wanted to make this woman feel like she belonged, because she believed love was never meant to be divided. It was meant to be multiplied. That night, the house was alive again with laughter and stories. Mary watched her son and his wife share smiles and whispers across the dinner table, and she felt a peace she had not known in years. She thought of the future, of holidays spent together, of grandchildren running through the same halls her son once did. She imagined teaching his wife old recipes and listening to her talk about her dreams. She saw in her mind a home filled once again with warmth and connection. In those moments, Mary felt reborn. She believed that every sacrifice, every tear, every prayer had led to this. She remembered the time she went hungry so he could eat and thought it was all worth it now. She remembered the years of loneliness and told herself they were leading her to this joy. She believed that motherhood had come full circle, that her love had built a bridge strong enough to welcome another heart. In the quiet of that night, after everyone had gone to bed, Mary sat by the window and whispered a thank you to God. She said thank you for giving her a son who found love. Thank you for giving her the chance to witness his happiness. She closed her eyes and smiled, thinking of the life they would all share together. She did not know that life had other plans, that the laughter would fade, that the warmth of that evening would become only a memory she could revisit but never relive. Yet in that moment, she was pure light, pure hope, pure joy, because that is what mothers do. They find beauty in beginnings, even when they don't know where the ending will lead. For Mary, the joy of her son's marriage was not just about the ceremony or the celebration. It was about seeing the boy she raised step into his own world, and even though she could not see the future, she believed in the power of love. She believed that families were forever, and that her home would always be a place where he belonged. And so she waited for the next chapter with an open heart, unaware that sometimes joy carries within it the shadow of coming silence. But even then, she would hold on to the memory of that day because it was the day her love became something larger than herself. At first, it was just small things, a missed call, a delayed visit, a message that said, "Mom, I will call you tomorrow." And tomorrow never came. Mary did not notice it right away because she believed love never disappears. It only changes its shape. She told herself he was busy, newly married, learning how to build his own world. She reminded herself that she had prayed for this, that her son's happiness mattered more than her loneliness. So she smiled through the quiet and told her heart to be patient. But silence has a way of stretching across time, like a shadow that grows longer with every passing day. What began as short pauses became weeks without a word, then months. She would wake up early, hoping for a message, a photo, a hello. She would glance at her phone before bed, waiting for it to light up with his name, but the screen stayed dark and the house stayed still. She tried not to count the days, but she always did. She remembered each Sunday he did not visit, each holiday that came and went with only a promise of next time. Mary filled her days with chores, cooking meals no one came to eat, cleaning rooms that stayed untouched. She kept his old bedroom the same, as if preserving it could somehow keep him close. Sometimes she would sit on his bed and close her eyes, breathing in the faint scent of the boy he once was. She would whisper his name softly into the emptiness and tell herself he could still hear her somehow across the distance. When neighbors asked about him, she smiled and said he was doing well, that he was busy with work and life and love. She never let them see the sadness behind her smile. She never told them that some nights she sat by the window, listening to the wind, as if it carried his voice back to her. She never told them about the ache that grew heavier each time she saw other mothers walking arm in arm with their sons. She began to write letters she never sent, small notes folded neatly in a drawer. "Dear son, I hope you are eating well. I hope you are happy. I made your favorite pie today. It reminded me of you." She would end each one with, "I love you, and maybe one day you will read this and remember me." Then she would tuck the paper away like a secret prayer. Only the walls of her house knew how many letters she had written, how many tears had fallen quietly between the lines. Her friends told her to visit him, but Mary could never bring herself to go uninvited. She did not want to be a burden. She did not want to intrude on his new life. She wanted to be wanted, not tolerated. So she waited and waited, hoping he would call, hoping he would come home one weekend and surprise her with flowers and laughter. But the doorbell never rang, and the pie on the counter grew cold, untouched. The silence became a part of her life, like a familiar ache in the chest, something you stop fighting because it never leaves. She learned to carry it gently. She would look at his photos, smiling beside his wife on vacations and birthdays, and she would smile too, even though her eyes burned with the weight of unspoken love. She was happy for him, or at least she tried to be, because that is what mothers do. They choose happiness for their children, even when it costs them their own. And yet, somewhere deep within her, a small voice whispered, "What happened to the boy who once ran into her arms after school, who called her every night just to say good night?" She tried to silence that voice, but it echoed louder with each passing year, until it became a part of her heartbeat. The gradual silence did not come with anger or blame. It came softly, like falling snow, covering memories in quiet stillness. Mary learned to live in that stillness. She learned to love him from afar, to speak to him in her prayers when words could no longer reach him. She never stopped believing that one day he would remember that love does not vanish. It only waits quietly behind closed doors. And so each night, before she slept, she would whisper into the darkness, "Good night, my son, wherever you are." And though he never heard her voice, the love behind it traveled farther than he would ever know. There comes a moment in every mother's life when she realizes the world she built around her child no longer exists. The laughter she once heard in every corner of the house has turned into echoes that fade before they reach her heart. Mary began to feel that kind of emptiness, the kind that does not scream or weep, but sits quietly beneath the ribs, heavy and constant. She had always believed that love was enough, that a mother's care could anchor a child forever, but she was learning that time has a way of loosening even the strongest bonds. The first time her birthday passed without a call, she told herself he must have been busy. The second time, she baked a small cake, lit a candle, and smiled through tears, whispering his name like a prayer. She scrolled through her phone, looking at old pictures, him with frosting on his cheeks from the cake she used to make, laughing so hard that his eyes disappeared. She touched the screen as if it were his face and said softly, "I miss you, my son." Holidays came and went. She hung decorations anyway, telling herself it would feel wrong not to. The house looked the same, but it no longer felt alive. She would set 2 plates on the table, one for herself and one for him. She never filled the second plate. She just left it there as a promise to the boy who used to come running through the door, carrying flowers from the neighbor's garden. Now those same flowers grew wild outside her window, untouched, unpicked, blooming for no one. Mary stopped mentioning her son's name to others because every time she did, the questions came. When did you last see him? How is he doing? And she never knew how to answer. She would smile politely and say, he is happy, he is busy. And that was true. He was busy building his life, just as she had hoped he would. But no one asked if she was happy. No one asked what it feels like to be erased from the story you helped write. The pain of being forgotten is not loud. It is not a cry or a scream. It is the quiet sound of a heart still beating in an empty house. It is the way she would walk into his old room and straighten the bedspread, though it never moved. The way she would hum lullabies she once sang to him just to remember the sound of her own voice when it had purpose. It is the way she would check her phone one last time each night before turning out the light, hoping to see his name glowing in the dark. Sometimes she dreamed of him, those dreams where he was little again, his arms wrapped around her neck, his laughter pure and unbroken. She would wake up with tears on her face, whispering, "Thank you for visiting me, my son," because dreams were the only place where he still came home. She started sleeping earlier, just to see him again, if only in her mind. There were days when she felt anger rising like a tide. Why did he forget? Why did he not see the love still waiting for him? But the anger never stayed, because a mother's heart does not know how to hate. It only knows how to ache. So she folded the anger away like an old blanket and replaced it with prayer. She prayed that he was safe, that he was loved, that he was at peace. And in those prayers, she found her strength again. Mary had become invisible, not because her love faded, but because it had become part of the background of his life, like air, something essential but unnoticed. She no longer expected a call. She no longer expected a visit. She only hoped that once in a while, when the world grew quiet, her son might remember her name and feel a small tug in his chest, a whisper reminding him that somewhere far away, someone still loved him more than life itself. And though the pain of being forgotten wrapped itself around her days, she carried it with grace. She did not curse her fate. She did not close her heart, because mothers do not stop loving even when love is not returned. They keep it alive inside them, quietly, faithfully, forever. There are some loves that time cannot erase, loves that live beyond distance, beyond silence, beyond forgetting. Mary's love was like that. It lived quietly inside her chest, glowing faintly, even when everything else in her life had dimmed. She no longer waited by the window. She no longer set 2 plates at the table. But every night, before she closed her eyes, she whispered a prayer for the boy who once called her home. She asked God to keep him safe, to fill his life with light, even if that light no longer reached her own heart. There was something sacred about the way she loved him. It was not the kind of love that asked for attention or demanded gratitude. It was the kind that gave without reason, that endured without reward. She had learned long ago that motherhood is not about being remembered. It is about remembering. It is about keeping the flame of love alive, no matter how cold the world becomes. So Mary carried that flame, gently shielding it from the wind of disappointment, protecting it from the chill of loneliness. Some nights, she would sit in her old rocking chair, the one her husband built when their son was born, and let the memories wash over her. She could almost feel his small hands tugging at her sleeve, hear his laughter echoing in the room, see his sleepy face pressed against her shoulder. She would smile through tears, whispering, "You are still my little boy, even if you have forgotten me." She would imagine him grown, successful, happy, and she would feel a warmth spread through her chest, because even if he had forgotten her, she could never forget him. There were moments when she saw him in strangers, a man holding his mother's hand at the market, a young father carrying his child through the park. Each time her heart would tremble between pride and pain. She would think of how love continues, even when its giver fades into the background, how her sacrifices, her tenderness, her quiet strength lived on through him, whether he knew it or not. Her love was the foundation beneath his every step, the invisible force that had carried him into the world. Mary's neighbors sometimes pitied her.
They thought she was lonely, but she was not lonely. She was simply full of memories, memories that were both her comfort and her cross. She found peace in small things: the sound of rain against the window, the smell of bread baking in the oven, the feel of sunlight on her hands. She said to herself that love is not meant to be kept, it is meant to be given away, and she had given all of hers gladly. She began to see her life not as something lost, but as something fulfilled. She had given everything she had to her son, and that was enough. Even if he never came back, even if he never called her name again. She knew that somewhere in the depth of his being, her love still lived, unseen but unbroken, because love like hers does not vanish. It becomes part of the person it touches. It becomes their kindness, their strength, their laughter. Sometimes she dreamed that he did call, that he did come home, that he wrapped his arms around her and said, "Mom, I am sorry. I never meant to forget you." And in that dream, she would smile and say, "You never really did, because in every breath you take, I am there." When she woke, she would feel tears on her cheeks, but she never felt sorrow, only peace, because in her heart, she knew that love is never wasted. It always finds its way back, even if not in words, even if not in time. Mary grew older, her hair silver, her hands thin and trembling, but her eyes still held the same quiet glow, the glow of a woman who had loved fully and without regret. She had seen life in all its beauty and all its cruelty, and through it all, her heart had remained soft. She would often whisper to herself that love does not end, it simply changes form. And when her days grew few, she felt no fear, because she knew that somewhere her love would continue living in her son, in the way he smiled, in the way he cared for others, in the way he lived his life. For even if the world forgets a mother's face, it can never erase her love, because that kind of love does not fade. It becomes eternal. If Mary could speak to her son one last time, she would not speak with anger, she would not speak with blame. Her words would come softly, like a lullaby, carried on the wind. She would tell him that life moves quickly, that love sometimes hides behind the noise of the world, but a mother's love never leaves. It waits quietly in the shadows for a moment of remembrance. She would tell him that time is fragile, that the years slip through your fingers like water, and one day, when the world grows still, he will wish he had held on a little longer. She would remind him of the nights she sat by his bedside when fever burned his skin, of how she prayed until morning that he would open his eyes and smile again. She would remind him of the stories she told to chase away his fears, of the meals she cooked when there was barely enough to eat, of the way she carried his dreams as if they were treasures made of glass. And she would say, "My son, all I ever wanted was to see you happy, to know that my sacrifices were worth something, to know that the boy I raised had become a man with kindness in his heart." She would not ask for grand gestures or endless apologies. She would only ask for presence, a call, a visit, a simple "I love you," whispered between busy days, because she knows that the smallest words can heal the deepest wounds. She would tell him that the world is full of distractions, but nothing will ever replace the woman who first taught him to love. Nothing will ever fill the silence left when a mother's voice is gone. Mary would speak not only for herself, but for every mother who waits by a quiet phone, for every woman whose arms ache for the embrace of a child grown distant. She would tell every son to look back before it is too late, to remember the hands that held him, the heart that built his strength, the voice that once called his name when no one else did. She would tell them that one day they will look for that voice and it will no longer answer. And that day will feel like standing in a room filled with echoes and realizing that all the echoes belong to love that can never return. If every son could hear Mary's message, the world would be softer, families would hold each other longer, and no mother would go to sleep wondering if she still matters. She would say to them, "Your success means nothing if you forget where you came from, your home, your roots, your mother who shaped your soul with her tears and her laughter." She would say, "Do not let pride or distance or the rush of living make you blind to the one who made your living possible. Because when you forget your mother, you forget a part of yourself." Mary would tell him that forgiveness is a beautiful thing, that even if he comes back years later, even if his words stumble, even if his heart is heavy with regret, she would still open the door with trembling hands and a trembling smile and say, "Welcome home, my son." Because a mother never stops loving. She never stops waiting. She never stops believing in the goodness she planted in her child. Her message would not be wrapped in sorrow, it would be wrapped in grace. It would be a reminder that love is the only thing worth remembering, that the world may take your time, your dreams, your youth, but it should never take your gratitude. She would tell him to call her today, not tomorrow, to hold her hand, not later, because tomorrow is a promise no one can keep. And when she was gone, when her chair sat empty and her voice faded into memory, her words would still linger in the hearts of those who heard them. Remember your mother while she is still here. Love her while her heart still beats for you, because one day you will search for her face in the crowd and realize that she was your home all along. And that is Mary's legacy, and every mother's legacy. A love that asks for nothing, a love that gives everything, a love that remains even when it is forgotten. Because in the end, every son carries his mother's heart within him, and that heart whispers forever, "Do not forget me."